Okay, good morning, everybody. It looks like we are live once again this morning. So hopefully most of anybody that had a few issues accessing this last week has been able to figure that out. I know I've responded to quite a few of you in emails. So I hope today just goes smooth as far as the new format goes. If you do know somebody that's out of the office, once again, unable to attend the training today, there are several ways that they can access that. I did send out a link to my YouTube channel. Again, the only thing you'll find on there is links to training videos that we will continue to update and post. There won't be anything else on there. So if you're looking for funny cat videos, they won't be on my YouTube channel. And if they pop up, they did not come from me. So I apologize for that, but just know that that's just another resource. I also sent an invite out to everybody that's on my list to a Google community site where these are going to be posted. And I'll also keep that updated with questions that come in and that we see, or if we do any additional trainings or have other dates scheduled, we'll kind of keep that updated as well. So just kind of a place where you can go and find the information. Last week, I know there was several questions, and most of the questions that we got in the Q&A was how to ask a question. So hopefully, if you are able to type in, how do I ask a question? You are in the right place to ask a question. So I'll leave it at that. If you cannot find where to ask a question and you have a question during the training, there are a couple of different things that you can do. Email Corinne or myself, and we'll make sure to answer the question after we're done with the presentation today. So that's one way you can do it. You can also send me an IM. If you send it to me during the training, I'll try to see it and we'll get to that question, or use the Q&A during the session as well. And those will be recorded. But if you just have a general question, we can always respond to that after as well. So again, this isn't going to be the method that we use for all future trainings, but just ones that we want to use as a review for everybody in the state so we can get out to all of you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be really focusing on the last piece of the puzzle when it comes to power, which is what we do with performance periods and also when we bump into sanctions. So I've asked Corinne again to join us. She has another meeting coming up at about 9:30. So at some point she is just going to duck out and leave, but she's already established that ahead of time. So we'll make sure she can do that. All right. So again, just as kind of a reminder of what we've gone over already. During our Uber conference, we talked about kind of the general power application steps, things like that. Last week, we really delved into the Epic side of things, how we wanted to enter that into the system, and what we wanted to do with any changes or any household, things like that, how to make sure that was entered correctly. And when we talked about that in Epics, we ran into several situations where we were entering information about sanctions or performance periods. So I did let you guys know that we would be discussing that today. So we're going to dive right in. So I did send out in an email a couple of different handouts. One of those is a performance period handout. Okay, and it should look something like this. So you should have got this in an email, and really you hopefully are all familiar with performance periods and what they mean. If you don't have this handout, the email one, don't worry about it right now, but just make sure that this is something that you have and are familiar with. This is another one of those tools that you can keep either in a cheat book or close to your desk, or even just save a copy of it so that when you're working a power case, you can go back and review these performance periods. If you don't have the other handout that I sent you, we'll talk about that in just a minute. It's also included in this, so don't worry about it right now, but afterwards you can go back and review any of the information that we go over today. So just kind of discussing performance periods. When we talk about power performance periods, remember this is the period of time where your client will need to complete all the different facets of their power case in order to receive a check. So each payment month is tied to a specific performance period. Now those are all listed here on your cheat sheet or your performance period handout. So if somebody is applying for power and they are completing during the performance period of November 15th and December 14th, then they would receive a January check. Now there's several examples below, but it is really just handy to remember that those performance periods always run through the 15th of one month to the 14th of the following month. So whenever you have a situation where you are either looking for compliance and payment periods, or if somebody falls into a non-compliant state or is not completing with their requirements, you'll need to look at the date that happened and match it up with the correct payment month that's in that second column right here. You'll notice down here, it also will let you know during the performance period what type of authorization we need to enter into EPICS. Okay, so when you do that, just like with a SNAP case, we authorize an I issuance at the end of the application month. We authorize an I issuance at the first month following the application month, and then we authorize an R issuance for that third performance period when we enter this information into EPICS. And just like when we work a SNAP case, once we put it into that R issuance status, then EPICS is going to automatically continue to roll our power case forward, and we shouldn't have to go back in and do anything with additional months unless there is a change that occurs in the case. So very, very similar to what we do in EPICS with a SNAP case. The only difference is we do need to look at the first and the second performance period and those payment months and make sure both of those are entered with that I issuance or that immediate issuance so that that check is issued on time. So below you'll see a couple of different examples. In example 1, you'll see that an application is received on April 12th. And that the client meets all their pay after performance requirements. So in that case, it means they're meeting eligibility requirements, it means they're meeting their child support requirements, and it means they're meeting their work requirements with the Department of Workforce Services. So in our first example, right here, since their application was received on the 12th of April, for the first example, you'll see that their first performance period will run from that date, the application date, to the end of the month. So for the April issuance, we would need to enter that into EPICS with an I issuance, since that is the first application month. For the second performance period, it is also going to be the same performance period, which is going to be the 12th to the end of the month, and that is going to be for the May power check. And we would also list that as an I issuance in EPICS. So April and May are going to be both I or immediate issuance and line up with the same dates on that performance period chart. Now for our third performance period, now we are going to go back to our standard 15th through the 14th of the following month. So our third performance period is going to start on the 15th and end on May 14th. And we would issue for the June payment month, we would issue it with an R issuance. Now EPICS is going to automatically take that case, and for the remaining performance periods in their certification, EPICS will automatically roll that into the following month. For the second example, it's very similar. The only difference that you're going to see is that instead of applying before the 15th of the month, somebody applied after the 15th of the month. So you notice on here that we have the 20th, April 20th as the date. And you can see how that affects. So the first performance period is going to be the 20th through the 30th. And the second, the 20th through the 30th. And the third is going to be the 20th through the 14th of the following month, or May 14th. Okay, and so you can take this with any dates that you have. Whenever you have an application date, if it happens before the 15th of the month, you can use this first example and use that as a guide on how to enter that in to EPICS. If it's after the 15th month, you can use this second example and use that as your guide. So again, just a kind of handy tool as you're working a power case or as you're creating little power packets where you're going to be using that as people come in. This is one of those things that would be really handy if you are not extremely comfortable with performance periods, just to be able to go back and review and make sure everything matches up okay as you enter it into Epics. And I'm gonna, Corinne, if you have anything to add, again, just feel free to interrupt as we go so I don't move too quickly.
Nope, you got it.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sanctions and what we do if we do bump into a sanction. So there can be a variety of reasons when a person goes out of compliance. But if you remember last week, we talked about the $1 status. So if a person goes out of compliance with power, they must be put in the $1 status for the payment that corresponds with the performance period. So if you receive information that your client is out of compliance, whether that comes from child support or workforce services, or you receive a change that indicates that they're out of the eligibility compliance, whatever the reason is, that's when we're going to put them into what we call that $1 status. And we talked about how to do that last week into Epics. So we're going to focus more on the why they go into $1 status and how that's going to work. Okay. Now, if we do have somebody that's in that $1 status for a full performance period and we don't hear anything from that client or no contact is made, then after that, we can close that case for loss of contact. And the code that we use in Epics is LC. And we did go over an example of this last week. So if you do get information from child support, for example, that states that they have a power applicant that's out of compliance, we don't just close that case. We put them into that non-compliance or that $1 status for the payment that corresponds with that performance period. So again, if it happened today on July 28th, our performance period would be from the 15th of July to the 14th of August for the following month's check. Okay, and then what I would do, as this is me, I would just go back into my handout, make sure that I lined that up and saw that since that report came in today and they went out of compliance on July 28th, I see that falls into the performance period that corresponds with the September check. Okay, sorry, skipping around just a little bit on this. So a failure to comply, and we'll use kind of the FTC acronym because here at DFS, we love acronyms. A failure to comply is tied specifically to a sanction month. So once that sanction month is passed, the participant no longer has to serve a sanction. So if you do receive a report of something that had happened, if it happened in the past, remember we can only sanction the month that corresponds with the performance period that the failure to comply or whatever caused them to go out of compliance happened in. So make sure you look at those dates and line it up with the correct sanction month. We don't sanction people for a period of time. So if somebody went out of compliance and we didn't receive notification until late, we don't sanction them for 30 days or a month. It has to correspond to the correct month that goes with that performance period. And then a non-compliance notice has to be sent out each and every time a non-compliance occurs. Even if you close a case, you still need to make sure that you send a notice of sanction. Okay, and the reason for that also is you may close a case and you may close it for valid reasons, but just know that as you close that case, you may have that client come back in and reapply for power, and they would still need to serve the sanction that corresponded with that performance period. So if somebody knew that they were out of compliance and came back in the very next day and reapplied for power, you could set everything up, but they would still need to go into the $1 status that corresponded with the right month. So you will need to look at that, and we'll go over a few examples of that. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at, and I will address questions as we go, and some of your questions may be answered as we go as well, but we'll take time to look at those. The next thing we're going to do is go over the non-compliance changes and performance period handout. So I did send this to everybody, and I really, this is a very handy thing to go over on your own as well, to be more familiar with how to treat changes. There are several examples in that document that we will go over today, but you may want to review on your own at a later date as well. So just a few notes on this, and you'll notice this right at the top of your handout, and it also tells you where that's found in the combined manual. Some of the things that we can look at for non-compliance are, for example, failure to comply with work requirements. So if you have somebody that fails to comply with work requirements, usually you're going to be notified by workforce services. They're going to be the ones that notify us that somebody is out of compliance with these work requirements. And we're going to use the sanction code as XW. So remember, we went over how to enter these sanction codes last week in our EPICS training, and you can go back and review that at any time. But we're going to use that XW as the sanction code. Okay, and then this is basically a failure of a mandatory applicant to keep appointments or comply with any of the work performance requirements that result in a family's power performance not being issued. So basically, once they go into the Department of Workforce Services, they meet with their case manager and they're set up with their individual responsibility plan. If they don't comply with any portion of that, they're going to be put in a non-compliant statement for work, and we're going to use that XW code. And so when we enter the amount in EPICS, it's going to be for $1 less than the amount they would have been eligible for. So we went over this last week, how to enter that in. Again, you can go back and review that. But when you put in the sanction amount, it's going to be for $1 less than what they're eligible for, which puts them in a $1 status, which basically tricks our old friend EPICS into keeping that case open during that month. So that is the way you're going to work that case. Okay, so the next one is going to be for child support requirements. Again, we're going to use XC as the sanction code here, and this can result with anything that causes somebody to come out of compliance with child support. So usually this happens right away if they are not making contact with child support. And just a note on this, we are going to take silence as a positive, which means if we do not hear anything from child support, we're going to assume everything is fine and they are in compliance. The only way you would need to act on something is if you received information from child support stating that they're out of compliance. So no news is good news in this case for your power clients. Okay, and then just like we did with the work non-compliance or work sanction, we're going to enter that code in, except we're going to use XC, and we're going to make them eligible for $1 less. And that's going to put them in a $1 status. And then finally, the last thing, they can go out of compliance for eligibility requirements. This is usually going to be reported to our office. The sanction code is XO, and this can be not completing with any of the eligibility factors. And that can include timely reporting, and it will result in them not receiving a check. So a timely reporting, remember, for a power case, everything is immediate. So as changes happen, your clients should be reporting that to you. So just make sure that you're looking at those types of things, even as you do recertifications or power reviews for your clients, checking those eligibility requirements again to make sure that nobody has fallen out of compliance. All right, so that's a quick review of the things that may cause somebody to go out of compliance. So we're going to just look at a few examples. And I'm just going to go over these. If you do have questions on these, hopefully, again, we can respond to those at the end or afterwards. But I also encourage you, after we finish up with the training, as this is a review, just to kind of go through some of these examples and think how they might apply to some of your power cases that you either have now or have in the past. Because a lot of these address some issues. Some of these you may never see. Some of these maybe you'll see quite often. So we're going to use Charlie Brown as our first example. Charlie Brown applies for power on December 15th. And we have in the household Charlie Brown, his wife Lucy Van Pelt. I'm not sure why Lucy chose not to change her last name, but she didn't for this example. But they are married. Lucy's son, Linus Van Pelt, and their children in common, Snoopy Brown and Schroeder Brown. Okay, and I did point that out kind of as a joke, but it is important if you do have somebody applying for power, we do want to make sure that we understand their marital status so we can apply the appropriate, just the right amount for their eligibility, so that we can use that earned income disregard for a married household. Okay, so initially all the power requirements are met and Charlie and Lucy fail to meet with the DWS case manager on February 2nd. So here are the questions that we're going to go over. We're going to ask what month did they receive a check? And you may have reviewed this before and already know the answer, and that's absolutely fine. But as you read through this, look at the dates, try to figure out what month they should receive a check. And then we know they went out of compliance on February 2nd. So what months are they going to be sanctioned for? And then if they get back into compliance with DWS on February 15th, how long do they need to stay in compliance? And when can they receive their next power check? All right, so we have this family, they've gone out of compliance. When are they going to receive their check? Those are the questions they're going to be asking you. So it's important that we understand how that works. So the first question, what month are they going to receive a check? So Charlie and Lucy are eligible for the following checks. So their first performance period was December 15th through December 31st. Okay, this was authorized with an I issuance on 12/31. Okay, their second performance period was for the same time frame, but it was for a January check instead of a December check, which was also issued with an I issuance. They were in compliance and eligible for both of those checks. Okay, and the third performance period was from 12/15 through January 14th for their February check. This was authorized with an R issuance. So all of these checks were set up at the time of initial application when they were meeting all of those requirements. So they were issued a December, January, and a February check. Okay. So since we know they went out of compliance, what month are they going to be sanctioned for? Well, their failure to comply, their FTC occurred on February 2nd. When we look back at our performance period chart, which again, I have to do every single time, just make sure I have lined it up in the right performance period. I'm going to see that that performance period is from the 15th of January to the 14th of February. Okay, so that is for their March check. So we are going to put Charlie Brown's case in a $1 status for March, and we're going to make sure to send out the A710, which is that performance requirements non-compliance notice, and we're going to send it out. So we know for March that they are going to be sanctioned their power check, and they are not going to receive any power check for the month of March. But they still received all of their previous checks as those were entered in, and they were eligible for them. Okay, so now Charlie and Lucy want to make sure that they are good with their power case. So they make sure they go back into the Department of Workforce Service on February 15th. So how long do they need to stay in compliance and when can they receive their next power check? If they get back into a new IRP, so they're going to sit down with their case manager again, make sure everything's back into place. On the 15th, they must stay in compliance for a full performance period before they can receive a check. So Charlie and Lucy stay in compliance for the performance period of 2/15 to 3/14, and they are again eligible for a power check in April. Okay, so remember though that this needs to be a full performance period. If these dates had changed at all, if they had come in on February 16th instead of the 15th, they would also be sanctioned for that next one, and they would have to be in compliance for a full performance period before they could receive another check. So it is really important that we pay attention to these dates so that we can enter in the correct amount. Make sure you're lining those up with your performance periods. Okay, for our next example, we have Shrek. Shrek Smith applies for power on March 22nd. Household consists of Shrek, his wife Fiona, and we have Donkey, Puss in Boots, and their child in common, Pigs 3 Little. So we have a situation where we have a mixed family. On March 28th, the benefit specialist was notified from child support that Shrek and Fiona failed to meet with them for their scheduled meeting. So again, with child support non-compliance, a lot of times this happens immediately. So the questions we are going to ask again is, what month did they receive a check? What month are they sanctioned for? And if they reapplied on April 3rd, would they have to serve a penalty or a sanction? And how about if they applied on the 11th or June 21st? So we're going to look at a few different dates on that. Okay, so this is why it's really important to make sure that everything is explained clearly to our clients. They understand what their requirements are because since Shrek and Fiona are not eligible for any power checks because they non-complied in the initial month. So again, they immediately went out of compliance by not cooperating or not following up with child support. And so we would deny this case and send out a denial notice. Okay, and then what months are they sanctioned for? So since the failure to comply occurred on 3/28, it impacts the first 3 performance periods. So if you go back and you look at your performance period handout, you'll notice how those first 3 performance periods works. And we would not only send that denial notice, but we would also send out our A710 or that failure to comply notice, indicating the sanction months would be for March, April, and for May. So this one time missing their appointment with child support has basically cost Shrek and his family three power checks. Okay, so be very clear about how this may affect them and how important it is that they keep their appointments in order to be receiving these power checks. So remember, the first performance period for this case would have been 3/22 to 3/31, which they went out of compliance for. And that was for the March check. Since it was the same performance period for the April check and they went out of compliance, they're also not eligible for the April check, and we're going to sanction that month. And then the third performance period would be for the May check. So those 3 months are the months that are sanctioned. And then if they reapplied on April 3rd, would they have to serve a penalty? And again, we're going to send out the A710 notice that indicates what months that they are sanctioned for. So if they come in on April 3rd to reapply, they would still have to serve the April and May penalty before they could issue a check. There is no reset button on a power case. Once they go into non-compliance and they go out non-compliance for a performance period corresponding with those pay dates, they can't go back and fix that. Okay, if they reapplied on May 11th, they would still have to serve the May penalty. If they applied on June 21st, then again, we don't sanction time periods. We only sanction the months corresponding to the performance periods. If they applied again on June 21st, then no penalty would have to be served, as this is past the performance periods that correlate with the failure to comply. All right, so the next example that you'll see on your sheet is for Belle. And Belle Beauty has a power case with Belle, her husband Beast, Beast's son Gaston, Belle's son Chip, and their child in common Lumiere. All right, and I know all of these characters, so I was able to pronounce them correctly, luckily. But Belle was scheduled for a power periodic review on May 14th, and she failed to show up. So somebody that misses their review date, how do we handle that? Again, is missing a periodic review a non-compliance issue? And what month or months are sanctioned? Okay, so for this question, missing a periodic review is failing to comply with eligibility factors. Therefore, there is a non-compliance. So if you have somebody that misses their appointment, misses their review date, they are in non-compliance and they need to be put in a non-compliance status, and the months will be sanctioned as well. So the non-compliance occurred on 5/14. This is during the performance period of 4/15 to 5/14, if you look at your chart. And this is for the June payment. June is then put into a $1 status, and the A710 is sent, indicating June is the sanctioned month. This means if somebody misses their review date, misses their review appointment, they may be sanctioned. If, for example, Belle did not come into the office at all, but then came back in to reapply later thinking her case was closed, she would still need to serve that sanction for June, since she missed that recertification or that power periodic review time. Okay, so now if we use that as our example, Belle now comes in on May 22nd to complete a review. So she missed her date, but she comes back in on the 22nd. So does this change how many months she is sanctioned? Remember, you can only close a power case if you have lost contact with the participant for a full performance period. So since we had not lost contact for a full performance period, we had not closed that case. So since she made contact, we are not going to close it. However, we can only reinstate the power check after she complies for a full performance period. So since she came in on the 22nd of May, she has not yet completed a full performance period to reinstate that check. And so she was out of compliance for the 5/15 through 5/22, which is for the performance period to be paid in July. So another A710 notice has to be sent out to notify that Belle will also be sanctioned for the July month. So she has 2 months of sanction to serve before she's once again eligible for a power check. And in order to receive that check, she would need to be in compliance for a full performance period in order to receive the August check now. Okay, so that period would be from the 15th to the 14th, and they have to be in compliance for that entire time to receive that August check. So again, stress to your applicants and to your clients the importance of meeting those dates. With SNAP cases, it's very lenient. With these, just a few days can make a big difference on how many months we have to sanction. Okay, so 2 more examples and we'll be done. So Oscar Fish applied for power on 3/6. Household consists of Oscar and his children, Lenny and Angie. So just 2 children, it looks like. Benefit specialist called Oregon, and Oscar received TANF in Oregon for March. So is Oscar eligible for a March payment? And hopefully this question is obvious, but we do want to make sure that we go over it. And also, is Oscar going to be eligible for an April payment? Or does he need to submit a new application for April? So first of all, is Oscar eligible for March? Remember that just like any other federal benefit, you cannot receive assistance in 2 states in the same month. So if he received TANF in Oregon during that March month, then he cannot receive power in Wyoming. So he is not eligible for March, and we would need to deny the application for March. Now, what about for April? So since the first 2 performance periods are the same, Oscar can receive an April check without a new application. So he doesn't need to come back in and apply again at a later date. Since the performance period is still, for that April check, is still the same, he would just need to be in compliance through the end of that initial month to receive an April check. Okay, so since he applied on March 6th, his performance period is going to be from the 6th to the 31st. We are going to deny March since he already received benefits in another state. we're going to go ahead and make sure that he is in compliance through the end of the month for his April check, which can be authorized on 4/1 and an approval notice then sent to the client. Okay, and then for his third performance period, which is going to be from the 15th to the 14th of the following month, would be for the May check. So as long as he's in compliance for that entire performance period, he's also going to be eligible for the May check. All right, so for our last example today, we have Helen Parr has an ongoing power case. Household consists of Helen, her children Dash, Violet, Jack, and Lucius. On 4/13, Helen called and reported she was received employment with Stretchy Rubber Band Factory. So A417 is the changed report notice, and we sent that to Helen requesting an employer statement by 4/23. Okay, Helen provides that employer statement on 4/20. Okay, so what month do we add this additional income to? Okay, since you have time for an adequate notice, again, remember that with a power case, we only need adequate notice, which means that notice of the change is going to arrive before the benefit is issued. The income would be added to May's eligibility. So again, remember that everything with a power case is going to be immediate. So if we do get notification, we need to act on that immediately. And as soon as that employer statement in this case came back in, we would act immediately, and we would also send that change notice out immediately as well. So if the case is over income, you would close the power case for excess income and send an A406. Even though Helen complied with all the requirements during the performance period, eligibility changes must be made to the following notice as long as adequate notice can be given. So Helen is now over income. And again, this is going to be our success story when it comes for power. And we would hope that most power cases would end this way, that somebody's found a job, that they now have excess income for the power case, and that causes them to go off the program. With this as well, with the new July changes, hopefully this makes this a little bit easier so that there's not so much of a donut hole, so to speak, where somebody is losing power benefits or SNAP benefits because of their newfound job, which isn't as high a paying job as they would like. So obviously we continue to try to make this program better for the citizens of Wyoming that it serves, and hopefully that will be something that we can help in cases like this. But again, these are the success stories we're looking for. This is just how you would treat that. Okay, so just kind of making sure that you can navigate through that. When you inform a case manager that a case is closed, or you inform child support that his case is closed, we want to make sure that we give them the actual closure date on EPICS, not the date the action was taken. So again, we use two different forms to communicate with child support and with workforce services, and that's that DFS 563A or B. Just make sure that you're using the actual closure date on EPICS when you do that. And then remember, again, just kind of that reminder, vehicles continue to count for power. So CM 806 will deal with how you treat vehicles. But this means that also if somebody has a vehicle change, that is something that they need to report and that we need to act on, since these are things that can affect their eligibility. So keep that in mind as well with vehicles. Okay, and then make sure you complete all EPIC screens even if you are denying a case. Okay, so whenever we're working through a power case, there are several things that get uploaded to the state or to the feds, that are data gathering points. So even though you can skip some of those and still deny a case, it is important that we put all that information into EPIC so that things are tracked correctly. If you don't do this, chances are you may have to go back in and enter it later. So it is much easier just to do it correctly the first time, enter in all the information, and then go ahead and deny that case. Also, we want to make sure we use the appropriate relationship codes for families. These are just general reminders. If you have a caretaker relative case, code the children as GC for grandchild or NN for niece, nephew, or other related, use OR as the code. So just a few other reminders of things that we want to make sure are done correctly. Okay, and then please make sure that the education level is accurate. You may have to ask that during the interview. I know we covered that earlier in one of our earlier trainings, but it's another one of those tracking things that we want to make sure are correct so that the data is reported correctly to our federal partners. If you have a denial closure case on or code on AFED, we want to make sure that the code is correct and that it's entered there. And it's a required code by the feds. Again, all this information gets reported. It makes Corinne's life much simpler, and it makes your life much simpler so she doesn't have to call and ask how that goes in and it's months later. The RW code closure is specific to SNAP. So remember that we're using that XW code for power if it is closure for not complying with the work program. So we went over those codes at the initial part of that. Just make sure that if you're looking at compliance for work, it's going to be the XW denial or closure code. All right, so we are finishing up just a few minutes early. I know that there's just a couple of questions that got put in the Q&A, so we will address. It looks like one of those was already addressed. But if you don't have any further questions, that's all I have for you today. I really appreciate you viewing this training. Again, this is going to be recorded, so if you decide you want to review this later on, please feel free to do that. And also, if you feel like you or your office could use a little bit of additional power training, let us know. That we do have more scheduled and some more small group types of things, and we're always going to have stuff like that come up on the calendar, and we can kind of inform you of those dates. Okay, so just one of the questions come in. Looks like Belinda received an application on 7/27, and client was previously sanctioned for July for non-compliant with TWS. She requested her case be closed, and she intended to move out of state, but she did not. Is she eligible since she had requested the closure? So Belinda, I guess I would have a little bit of question. She would need to make sure that you would need to make sure that she was in compliance for that full performance period, or you would still need to sanction that August month. So if she had closed that case and was not in compliance during that time, she would still have to serve an August closure. So a little bit more information on that. And if you have that specific one, you can email that to myself and Corinne, and we'll make sure we get back to you on it. Okay, so, and then I see your follow-up as well, that she would have to comply for a full performance period to be authorized again. So again, if that case had closed, even though it's closed, we still have to make sure that they are in compliance for a full performance period before we can issue that check. Okay, and then next question, Jessica had a question. Is it possible to get 563s that show denial dates, not them, and not closure dates? Doesn't have a checkbox for denial. That's a question for Corinne, and I will make sure to pass that along and see if there's any additional changes. I do know that your suggestions are very valuable when it comes to forms and notices. So any of those things that you feel like just don't quite make sense or could make your life easier, if it has to do with power, email those suggestions to Corinne. I know she's made a lot of changes even recently to some of the forms that we use, and if there's a reason why it doesn't change, she'll probably let you know that as well. So all of those suggestions are really good. Okay, and then Mary's question on the A406, what dates do you put on the notice and why do they get extra months? The dates that you're going to put on that notice have to do with the performance period. I would have to go and look at this notice, and for right now, I just don't have that in front of me. So I will save this question. And also the great thing is if you go back in here, I can post the answer to this question on the forum the same link that you went to, but I also email you a response to that. Okay, so really good questions on those. So even though, like I said, if you go back in, you can review this training at any time. You can go back in and look at it. We'll try to post some of those answers and some of those questions as we go. So I just don't have the 406 in front of me, so I apologize. Okay, that's all I have. If some of you already are still hanging on, I'm going to close up shop. Again, thanks for all your participation. If you have more questions, if you have some additional power training needs, let us know. And we will make sure to continue to try to do periodic reviews like this throughout the remainder of the year and going forward. So thanks again.